So, did you make contact with aliens? Were you taken to another planet, to a mothership? How did they communicate with... Can you tell me what they look like? Can you tell me how many of them there were? Were you given food? Injection? It's important the entire world learns of your experience.
That's enough!
The teachers are alive. They're not books. They are the very living essences of nature itself.
Unbelievably powerful supercomputer that's running our reality, and we don't have a clue as to how to operate it.
Say in your mind, say to yourself, I am more than my physical body, because I am more than physical matter. I can perceive that which is greater than the physical world. For the seeker.
Houston, 20 seconds to LOS TDRS.
Roger, nice to be in orbit.
Broadcasting from the Forest Tower Studios in the Mossy Creek bottoms of Cane Creek, Arkansas. I'm Joe Roop, and this is Lighting the Void, your voice for verity in this crazy realm of polarity. It is Wednesday, March the 28th, and the night is still mild and a little bit damp here in the natural state. As the first of the spring rains settled down and the moon is still waxing on into midnight, 5 your chakras, sync both hemispheres of your brain together, and shoot your magical beam of light through your third eye tonight with us as we peer into the void between spirituality and science. Thanks for joining us wherever you're listening from across the World Wide Web. If this is the first time you're listening to the show, remember this is a live show that's broadcasted on thefringe.fm. It can also be heard on lightingthevoid.com, which is our website. TalkStream Live, TuneIn, Spreaker, iTunes Radio, Radio Guide FM, Radio Garden, and more by proxy via the Fringe FM. Now, for any reason, if you lose your internet, because every now and then we know that you may not get good internet, there's a call to listen line, and that number is the TalkStream call to listen line, 701-719-3971. Just call that number, put it on speakerphone, or put your headphones in, however you want to do to listen to the show. Thank you to all of your support. We really could use your donation, so if you find anything of value from the show or the network, you can donate using the donate buttons on the website, or as well as on the network website. Also, we got some new supporters on social media, and I'm probably going to pronounce your name wrong, but I'm going to do my best. Dave Watzowitz, Debbie Russo-Matt, Mike Brennan, Daniel Elper, Azure Skies, and Beth Ritter. Thanks for your support. Really appreciate that. I'm excited tonight. Dr. Robert Schoch is going to be joining us for the first time on Lighting the Void. Been a monumental week. I want to thank Laird Scranton for coming out last night. Boy, what a crazy and intense conversation that was. And I actually did record something for you newsletter subscribers after the show, so make sure you subscribe to the newsletter on the website. In the top right, you just put your name and email in, and you're a member of the newsletter. That's it. Also, follow, like, subscribe, everything, Lighting the Void. You can also email me during the show at contact@lightingthevoid.com. Don't forget to get your bottle of ancient life oil while it's still prevalent. I know I do want to apologize, though. I know I get a lot of Canadians. I've gotten a lot of Canadian emails and Canadian listeners asking me about getting a bottle of that ancient life oil as far as crossing the Canada border. And I have to go ahead and apologize. I don't think we can do that. And I know we've got a lot of Canadian listeners, so sorry about that. But you can, if you're interested in magicalegypt.com, you can definitely go to magicalegypt.com, put in the code word fringe, and get 10% off any downloads there as well. And so, I had a thing I want to tell you guys about. Some exciting stuff's coming to the network. I know you're waiting on Crystal Mind Productions, but Everett and I have been talking. I don't really want to announce it yet, but as far as exciting stuff goes for this show, for Lighting the Void, yeah, something really cool is coming. And it's not finalized yet, so that's why I can't talk about it. But I can tell you that we are listening to you. We're listening to what you're asking for, the stuff you like, the stuff you don't like, the stuff you want more of, and we take it to heart. So don't forget that. It's not something where we take it for granted. If you want to join into the chat room, you can come over to our Spreaker chat. And if you just go to Spreaker and you search Lighting the Void or The Fringe FM, you'll find us over there. There's already a few people in here. Looks like Chris George Zuger's in here, Catalina, Tina, John, David. So this is kind of where I think the cool people hang out anyways. But if you're listening on the network, on TuneIn, on iTunes, Internet Radio, or wherever you're listening from, thank you so much for listening. All right, let's move on with the show. I can't wait to talk to Dr. Schoch. I'm excited about this. Let's get into the Gilson Report. Got to do the Gilson Report every night. Speaking of which, Jeff, I want to say I didn't see you in the chat room last night, brother. I'm so sorry because it started moving so fast. So if you're listening, I can't wait to get back in the studio here and have you back, brother. I miss you. All right. So the earliest known human footprints in North America are found, guess where, you Canadians, on a Canadian island. Stamped across the shoreline of the Calvert Island, British Columbia, are 13-year-old human footprints that archaeologists believe to be the earliest found so far in North America. Now, this finding came out today. It adds support to the idea that some ancient humans from Asia ventured into North America by hugging the Pacific coastline rather than by traveling through the interior. So initially, this provides evidence that people were inhabiting this region at the end of the last ice age, and that's according to Duncan McLaren, an anthropologist at the Hakai Institute and University of Victoria in British Columbia and lead author of the study. He says it's possible that the coast was one of the means by which people entered the Americas at the time. So this is kind of goes along with the theme of some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight, that our paradigm shifts. We don't just have people that believe in ancient civilizations anymore and talk about them because they're cool. We can actually talk about it based on some of the evidence. And that's really cool to me. And when I say things like that, I mean earlier civilizations before what we know as dynastic Egypt. Even the word Atlantis might come up tonight. But there's some other work that we're going to get into with Dr. Robert Schoch as well. All right, moving on in the Gilson Report here. An article came out today by Rachel Stavis. I thought this was interesting. Pseudoscience, maybe, but she put out an article called What It's Like to Really Be an Exorcist. Now, I'm not going to read the entire article, obviously, for boring radio reasons, but I will tell you that it's worth a read. So if you Google Rachel Stavis, Stavis, it's pretty interesting. She's been an exorcist her entire life. And what she says is, I'll just give you a brief discussion about exorcisms real quick, is that she says that exorcisms and possessions are super common. That's because every single person on this planet has probably been possessed at one point or another in their lives. And 99% of people are walking around with entities now, totally oblivious to them. They may suspect something is wrong, but they may attribute it to stress, a bad boss, or the fight they just had with their boyfriend or girlfriend. These traumas, big or small, may have triggered the initial possession, but they're only symptoms, not the cause. Okay, well, let me finish this. It says, being possessed has common symptoms. Her client's most common physical complaints include arthritis, headaches, nausea, and other gastrointestinal issues or infertility, but she also sees clients with major life-threatening illnesses like cancer or AIDS. She says, I may not be able to save these people's lives, but every single time I remove the entity that helps lessen their suffering. Why? Because not every physical sickness is just physical. There are many energetic reasons. But joint pain is probably the most common issues entities cause, and typically my clients will have visited a doctor to alleviate their symptoms, only to be given a prescription for pills that helps for a short time but never fully cures them. The reason modern medicine doesn't work, of course, is that the problem is entirely linked to entities. So she's saying that a lot of our illnesses are caused by possession. Now, the there was a time when I would laugh at that. Now, scientifically, because we talk about spirituality and science on the show, scientifically, I would have to still laugh at that and say, okay, no, illnesses are caused by, what they're caused by, imbalanced cell growth, things like that, blood, genetics, all kinds of stuff. However, when I read the book, The Magus of Strovolos, which was a book entirely about Daskalos, this kind of became a reality to me. But what I will say is that the psychology does play a role. It goes back to the placebo effect. So I want you guys to read that. It's by Rachel Stavis, and according to what she's talking about, possessions aren't like what we saw on The Exorcist in the movie. We all have these entities and negative energies that we carry around with us that cause us physical harm, mental harm, and energetic harm. So it's just an interesting read, but she still considers herself an exorcist. All right, moving on here. Elon Musk is at it again, talking about his brain implants that the startup reportedly planned to test on animals. Neuralink, this is what it's called. I think we talked about this a few months ago, but it's a company co-founded by Elon Musk that aims to develop brain implants for boosting people's mental capabilities. He's had plans to test this on animals, according to a new report, but this information is going to provide rare insights to Neuralink's earliest plans for executing its bold vision, which could ultimately diversify Musk beyond cars with Tesla. But, Musk is just he's rich, so he's into everything, right? But this report came out from Gizmodo. I don't know if you read Gizmodo, but it's a pretty cool site. But Neuralink, there was an employee, this guy's name was Jared Burchall. He mentions plans for a small operating room for in vivo testing and a small room to house rodents. But he hasn't really spoken much about this thing, but he said that before the company would seek to deploy its technology for a wider population. So what this does, he says it's about 7 to 9 years away. What Neuralink does is it's supposed to apparently hook up to your brain. So I guess you chip your brain, and it helps with certain kinds of disabilities like brain injuries, paraplegics, seizures, etc. Now, I'm not into I am a little bit afraid of putting chips in your body and artificial intelligence and things like that. However, my ex-wife suffers from seizures. I know a friend of ours, Gordon Roop, suffers from seizures. And you got to ask yourself, you talk to people all the time like, oh, no, I would never put a chip in my body, ever. Well, let me ask you this. Would you, if you were suffering, if you were having seizures every single day, would it be worth it to you to stop? You could always try the CBD oil, But I'm just saying it might be worth it to you. So Elon Musk is going to have that out. So we got the self-driving cars coming out. Now, this is going to be out in 7 to 9 years. Imagine what it's going to be like in 10 years from now. It's going to be crazy. Speaking of artificial intelligence, every night I talk about this, and I'm sorry. I promise you, I'm looking for the new UFO, new alien story. Every night. I know you don't think I am, but I promise you I am. But there's always something new about artificial intelligence that comes out. Now, here's the thing. Bosses are using artificial intelligence to find out what's wrong with you. Now, this year, for the first time, this Manhattan con-based company tapped an artificial intelligence tool called Xander to analyze responses at work. So at your job, right? Xander can determine whether an employee feels optimistic, confused, or angry, and provides insights to help manage the teams. The tool's developers at Ultimate Software Group Inc. I don't know why you just can't talk to your employees to figure that out, but okay. But from a block of text, the software analyzes answers to open-ended questions based on language and other data, assigning attitudes or opinions to their employees. So now you're a test dummy at your work. They can't just ask you how you feel. They've got to use artificial intelligence to figure it out because they don't trust you. I don't get this. But one top executive at SPS learned from recent survey analysis that he needed to work on his temper. One of my lowest scoring items was maintaining my composure under stress. Why do we need artificial intelligence to figure this out? You can ask your mother or your best friend or someone that's worked around you long enough to let you know that. On the bright side, Xander reported that manager staff felt that he was fair and honest. Research shows that emotions are key to understanding what motivates employees. Okay, duh. This is just another reason for me. This thing goes on, but I think this is just another reason for them to use artificial intelligence on us, because this, to me, is redundant. You don't need artificial intelligence to find out what's wrong with you or how you feel, or the base root of why you're acting why you are. That's an adult responsibility. You can you could just keep asking yourself, why am I doing this, over and over again to get to the key to that. You don't need a computer program. Companies have used these technologies to track employees' actions and help boost productivity for years, but now some are turning to software to sniff out differences between what employees say and how they feel. This is a First Horizon National Corp. Oh, man. So here's what they're saying. I guess the reason why they're saying this is because I don't know what kind of job you have, but at my work, at my part-time job, and any other job that I've ever worked, they always send out surveys to everybody. And they want to know how everybody feels about their boss, or, if they're getting anything done. They're saying that this is going to save them time and money to pour over 3,500 surveys, because this place, First Horizon National Corp, tried it out. They said it would take another 5 months to submit action plans based on this data, but that's just crazy to me. So they want to know how their employees feel, so they got all these people in this room and these charts, right? And people are getting checks to find out why their employees are disgruntled. I know Amazon has got some kind of thing that shocks you or something when you go to areas that you're not supposed to go. I don't think you need artificial intelligence to figure out why some of their employees might feel like they're being treated like dogs or monkeys, Anyways, let's move on to some positive stories. Going to concerts will actually, they say, according to research, help you live longer. I'll agree to that. According to a new study by O2, which owns some of the largest music venues in the UK, alongside Goldsmith University associate lecturer, this guy named Patrick Fagan, regularly attending live shows can help expand your lifespan. The study says that 20 minutes at a show at any concert can lead to a 21% increase in the feeling of well-being. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess there's nothing in the news. There's absolutely nothing in the news. All of this stuff to me is redundant. The coolest thing that happened this week was that guy actually launched himself on that rocket. You don't need this article or this thing about going to concerts to help you live longer. This stuff, I'll tell you what I'm going to start doing. I'm probably going to stop talk. I'm probably going to change the segment up because it's starting to get annoying to me. You don't need artificial intelligence to figure out how people feel, and you don't need a study about going to concerts to let you know that it's going to increase your lifespan. All kinds of stuff increase your lifespan. Positivity increases your lifespan, Anyways, here's something funny. Ask yourself, are we an intelligent society, especially us that search the internet? Here's some things that have been searched on the internet, and this is a fact. Do bunnies lay eggs? There are a surprising number of people that don't know this. According to Google AdWords, the phrases, do bunnies lay eggs and do rabbits lay eggs, have received between 1,000 and 10,000 average, not annually, but monthly searches. That's a pretty big number, which leads me to believe that people really don't know if bunnies or rabbits lay eggs. Now, this is what they don't say in here, though. I mean, it'd be funny to say that all humans, I'm sure there are some humans that are putting this in the search engine, but, and this is I'm doing this because it's kind of themed around Easter, but I'm sure some of these are probably kids on the internet after they've seen certain commercials, the Cadbury Bunny and stuff, but I thought that was kind of funny. All right, guys, when we come back, Dr. Robert Schoch is going to be joining us. Don't go anywhere, guys. We'll be right back after these words.
pull back the blinds and uncover the truth. This is Lighting the Void Radio.
KTLK Digital Broadcasting. We rock the paranormal talk.
Live from New York, it's Saturday night!
Live Saturdays on the Fringe FM. The Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable at 1 Pacific, 4 Eastern. Dark Waters at 4 Pacific, 7 Eastern. Into the Paranormal with Jeremy Scott at 6 Pacific, 9 Eastern. Spaced Out Saturday with Joe Roop, 9 Pacific, midnight Eastern. And S4 with Eric Cooper, midnight Pacific, 3 a.m. Eastern. Live Saturdays on the Fringe FM. We rock the paranormal talk. Online at thefringe.fm.
Hey Fringe FM listeners, did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or no Wi-Fi available, you can still listen to every minute of the Fringe FM by calling 701-719-3971. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. Saves your data plan and no extra cost if you have unlimited minutes. Call 701-719-3971. That's 701-719-3971. Listen to the Fringe FM on any phone, anytime, anywhere.
Wouldn't you love to have a really sharp memory? More than ever before, people of all ages are struggling with memory problems and brain fog. Whether your poor memory is age-related or due to the effects of chronic stress, you can now improve your memory while reducing stress with the dietary supplement Calm and Clever. That's right, you get 2 products rolled into one. Some ingredients in Calm and Clever enhance memory and help retain newly learned information more effectively, while other ingredients in Calm and Clever reduce stress by maintaining healthy levels of the stress hormone cortisol. Calm and Clever was created by scientist Kurt Hendricks, a principal investigator in 2 NIH-funded studies on Alzheimer's disease. To sharpen your mind and feel calm and centered, try Calm and Clever for 2 months. You'll love the way you feel and think. To order Calm and Clever, call 1-800-728-9948 or visit calmandclever.com. 1-800-728-9948 or calmandclever.com.
You're listening to Lighting the Void Radio with Joseph Roop. Stay up to date right now, lightingthevoid.com.
Don't feed the Archons. Feed ducks instead. And listen to Shift Happens on the Fringe FM, Fridays 7 to 9 p.m. Pacific. Cortana out. Quack.
I'm getting older and noticing that my body just doesn't work as well as it used to. So I like to keep fit as possible by hitting the gym a few times a week. Recently, I started having a nagging bicep pain, and it got so bad I couldn't even lift the weights. When I was complaining about it to a friend, he told me about angioprim. He said chelation helps remove toxins, heavy metals, and cholesterol in veins and arteries that may cause blockages. You know, after just 1 week of taking angioprim, the pain was gone, and now I'm back in the gym full strength. Scientific research proves the active ingredient in angioprim has superior oral chelation action that helps promote cardiovascular health. So to learn more, go to angioprim.com. That's ANGIOPRIM.com. Or talk to a trained consultant. Call Angioprim toll free at 877-882-7221. You'll feel better with more energy. Call 877-882-7221 or go to the website angioprim.com.
Come own the night with us. Hi there, this is Dave Scott, host of Spaced Out Radio. Every Monday through Friday, right here on KTLK, the Fringe FM, I'm going to lead you down a path of mystery, intrigue, and suspense. So whether you've seen a UFO, had a run-in with Bigfoot or Dogman, or had ghosts running around your house, this is the place to be. Spaced Out Radio, right here on KTLK.
Oh, you know what I like about me? This is Rich Giordano, host of the Paranormal Code. No, I'm serious. The show's on twice a week now, Sunday and Thursday, on thefringe.fm and Spreaker, 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 Pacific. Yeah, it's 2 hours. It's live. And I do a show like you've never heard before. So you're going to come here, you're going to get your information, you're going to be entertained. But you're also going to hear the truth like, you know, you won't forget. Like you've never heard before. And for those of you who've been following, thank you. Thank you for talking me into this extra night. Now I'm on twice. Great. Hey, good for you, right? The Paranormal Code. This means something.
This is Lighting the Void Radio with your host, Joseph Roop. It's the show about truth-seeking and freeing the spirit, shattering your limited beliefs, revealing hidden truths, and much, much more.
Welcome back to Lighting the Void. I'm your host, Joe Roop. We're live on the Fringe FM. Don't forget, this show comes on live on the Fringe FM network every Tuesday and Wednesday night. I want to thank Larry Scranton for coming out last night. Don't forget, I will be hosting Spaced Out Saturday this weekend, Saturday night. So if you're not doing anything Saturday night, come out and hang out with us there as well. All right, now we're going to bring on our guest, Dr. Robert Schoch. Dr. Robert Schoch I'm so excited about this. He has a Ph.D. in Geology and Geophysics from Yale and has been working in Egypt, focusing on the Great Sphinx and the Great Pyramid since 1990. He's a tenured, full-time faculty member at the College of General Studies of Boston University, where he has taught a variety of science courses since 1984. Based on his geological studies, Robert has determined that the Sphinx origins go back to a pre-dynastic times, thousands of years older than previously thought. In recent years, Dr. Schoch has expanded his research to encompass pyramids and associated structures around the world. Also, his book, Forgotten Civilizations, discusses the role of solar outbursts in our past and future. Now, there's scientific confirmation of advanced civilizations at the end of the last ice age, the solar catastrophe that destroyed it, and what the evidence means for our future. Now, this demonstrates, based on a 12,000-year-old megalithic complex of Göbekli Tepe, the advanced civilization extends thousands of years further back than generally acknowledged. This book examines the catastrophic solar outburst that ended the last ice age, wiping out antediluvian civilizations and incinerating much of the evidence of that period. It also reveals the data that shows solar outbursts powerful enough to devastate modern society that could return in the future. Now, building upon his revolutionary theory that the Sphinx dates back much further than 2500 BCE, geologist Robert Schoch reveals scientific evidence of advanced civilizations predating ancient Egypt, Sumeria, and Greece, as well as the catastrophe that destroyed it nearly 12,000 years ago, and what its legacy can teach us about our own future. Dr. Robert Schoch, thank you for coming on Lighting the Void the first time. This is really awesome.
Oh, my pleasure, my pleasure.
So your research, everybody likes to talk about, the water erosion of the Sphinx, your work with John Anthony West. It's been a topic of major discussion for years and years. But, when I went to your website, and I'm going to admit, and I don't want you to get upset with me, but when I looked at all of the research that you've actually done, I don't know why we're not talking more about this. There's especially this solar outburst deal. I mean, this is a reality that we need to be paying attention to, right?
Oh, I agree. I absolutely agree. Something that I think we need to take into account. And I say this, how do I want to say this? I love the ancient civilizations, and I started in Egypt working with John Anthony West, who I think people probably know, but I'll say it. He was my dear colleague and my dear friend, and he died of cancer ultimately February 6th, just a month, not even 2 months ago. Mm-hmm. And so many people know of me or know of him, John Anthony West, and myself for our work in Egypt and redating the Sphinx and pushing civilization back thousands of years earlier. And that's all wonderful and fine and interesting, but I've had many people say to me over the years, well, what does it really matter? It's sort of interesting, yeah, and it revolutionizes history and rewrites what we know about the origins of civilization. But what matters to my mind is not just that we're pushing back, or I've pushed back the origins of civilization, but it is what caused that, I call it the earlier cycle of civilization, to collapse, to have been destroyed, to have disappeared, and that was the natural catastrophe that ended the last ice age, major solar outburst that you were just referencing. And this is important because our sun is a star, just like other stars, it's not always stable. It goes through periods of instability. It destroyed civilizations 12,000 years ago. It brought about major Earth changes. And this is well known in the geological record. This isn't something that, is channeled or whatnot. I'm not making fun of channelers.
Sure.
But, this is straightforward science, that there were major changes 12,000 years ago, to be precise, 9,700 BC. Major climatic changes, major changes when it came to things like our records of earthquake activity, volcanic activity, changes in the atmosphere, changes in the magnetosphere, allowing more radiation to come down to the surface of the Earth. This is reflected in major extinctions of mammals on Earth, large mammals. It's reflected, frankly, in a major catastrophe for humans, not just the civilizations of the time, but, to be crude, a lot of people were killed because of the major changes, and the rest that survived really survived by going into hiding, primarily underground into caves, etc., before they reemerged. But the bottom line is, this is not just super interesting, but it could happen again. And all the indications are, and I'm not someone who likes to, I'm not a prepper, as some people call them, who,
right.
Claiming doomsday is coming around the corner and we better, get ready for it. Oh, and by the way, I can sell you a survival kit. I don't have anything to sell like that. I mean, I hope people will buy my book, but that's just for the information.
Right.
And so I'm not like that. In fact, I don't even like talking about this, but I think we have to face reality. We have to face the real scientific evidence, and that is that this happened again. And it happened before, and it will happen again. This is the way geology works. This is the way the cycles of the Earth, the cycles of the sun work.
Right.
So it's much more, to me, than just, looking at ancient civilizations, and isn't that fascinating? That's how it started for me. But there are real lessons to be learned.
So is this something that you discovered further down the road in your research, as in your studies? That something that you came to understand as you looked at these geographical sites and history? It was something that or was it something that you've always studied?
No, that's absolutely correct. What you just said is basically correct. Let me to put it into a bigger context. As you mentioned in the intro, my degree, my Ph.D. is Geology and Geophysics from Yale. I graduated from Yale back in 1983, which seems like a very long time ago now. To some people, it's still fresh in my mind. And at that time, I was not working on the Sphinx. I was interested in ancient civilizations, but I was really trained as a geologist, as a very much a field geologist and geophysicist, something at that time that was a fascinating topic for me and for many of my colleagues, and still is, was what was happening at the end of the last ice age. What was occurring, and I'm now speaking geologically and climatologically, what was occurring. We were, even back then, reconstructing what was occurring, but we didn't realize how intense it was, how fast it occurred, and there was no good explanation as to why it occurred. Now, the explanation that I just proposed was solar outburst. So it was a topic that was of interest to me, what was happening at the end of the last ice age, that then combined with my work on ancient civilizations, because back in the late 1970s, early 1980s, I wasn't studying ancient civilizations intensely. Certainly at that time, I simply accepted the dogma of the day, which is still the conventional wisdom for many people in and out of academia, that civilization originated a mere 5,000-6,000 years ago, 3,000, 4,000 BC. In the late 1980s, I first met John Anthony West. He was the one who really introduced me to the concept that well, maybe civilization goes back further, and he was basing this on the Sphinx and on a fellow named Schwaller de Lubitsch. I hate to throw around so many names, but the late Schwaller de Lubitsch and John Anthony West was a expert on Schwaller's work, Symbolist Egypt, as it's sometimes called, a different interpretation of Egypt. Schwaller had noticed that the Sphinx seemed to be weathered by water, not by wind and sand. This was incompatible with the Sahara conditions that the Sphinx now occupies. It sits on the edge of the Sahara. So Schwaller had suggested that maybe the Sphinx goes back to a much earlier period, but this would make no sense if civilization simply began around 3000 BC. So my introduction to Egypt was really through the invitation of John Anthony West to travel to Egypt with him as a geologist, explicitly as a geologist, to analyze the geological features of the Great Sphinx. Lo and behold, to make a very long story very short, it turns out that the evidence stands up. The Sphinx was weathered by water, not by wind and sand, at least the primary weathering on it. This has to go back to a much earlier climatic period, pushes the date of the Sphinx back to an earlier period, ends up pushing this the age of civilization back to a much earlier period, back to the end of the last ice age. Civilization collapse, was devastated about 12,000 years ago. Why? This ties in now with the geological evidence for the end of the last ice age, and it sort of came full circle for me in my career, putting all these things together.
Wow. I've always wondered when I was discovering this about you and your friendship with John Anthony West, and, you know, being in this scholarly section of work that you are, when you saw that for the first time, I always wondered what your thoughts were. Was it a thought of, I must talk about this, but I'm afraid, or was it, did you fight it a little bit? I mean, because you'd have to think if I'm going to present this to anyone, to any community, to any scholarly community about this, that it goes against everything that we've ever been taught. There's going to be a little bit of backlash, but I'm just curious about what your thoughts on that. Were you afraid at the time?
I can tell you, John Anthony West was very, very frustrated with me, because immediately when I first saw the Sphinx, there were two things that immediately went through my mind. Okay, so this is in my mind, and this is within minutes. Actually, I sometimes say within 30 seconds, and it probably was within 30 seconds. One is that I saw geologically there was something amiss. There was something wrong. The type, the nature of the weathering and erosion on the Sphinx and the walls of the Sphinx enclosure did not fit the time frame that Egyptologists were saying, that they were giving. They were saying that the Sphinx was carved from scratch from the bedrock in 2500 BC, and what I was seeing geologically, that did not make sense. It had to be much older. So that was my first thought. My second thought was that the head looks different. The head is not as weathered and eroded, and it's too small for the body. And I virtually immediately came to my own conclusion. This is all mental now. I wasn't saying anything.
Sure.
That the head was too small for the body. Why? Because it's not the original head. It's been recarved. You know, the original head, which I now believe, and we now have evidence, very clear evidence, it was a lioness. It was the lioness Methead, and I can come back to that. We have evidence for that now only within the last year, based on hieroglyphic inscriptions. But the head was a lion. Even back then, I thought it was probably a lion's head on a lion's body originally, and it had become weathered and eroded. Well, what did they do? They recarved it in dynastic times. So yes, it's a dynastic head from about 2500, 2600 BC, but it's not the original head. So that went through my mind immediately. But in tying in with exactly what you were saying, John Anthony West was very, very frustrated with me because, as he used to say to me and tell other people, he couldn't get a declarative sentence out of me initially because I was very hesitant, because I saw the implications of this, number one. I realized at a certain level that my academic colleagues were going to push back on it, and I wanted to be very careful and make sure I was not making any mistakes. I wasn't going to go out and have a press conference based on my first observations, my first instincts. So it actually took a number of trips back and forth to Egypt to collect data to really make the case. Something that I insisted on and we raised the money and did was we did geophysics around the Sphinx. So that was done in conjunction with the geophysicist Thomas DeBecke. So Thomas DeBecke and myself, we did geophysics around the Sphinx. Basically what we used was, it's known as seismic techniques. We used a sledgehammer on a steel plate to generate energy waves that penetrate down into the rock and bounce back up, and you can model what's underneath. This was important because I wanted to look at subsurface weathering, subsurface mineralogical changes, which can independently be used to try to calibrate the age of a structure of when it was first carved. As a side note, we also found a major cavity, a major chamber under the left paw specifically of the Sphinx, which it turns out, much to my chagrin in some ways, the psychic Edgar Cayce had predicted. I didn't know anything about that. And a lot of people got very excited that we found it. I wasn't quite so excited because, on the other hand, my academic colleagues who aren't into psychics and whatnot, they sort of they didn't see this as going in my favor, should we say.
That's exactly what I was wondering about, like how you felt at this time, because here you're all about scholarly work, scientific evidence. This is what's important to you. And you see this, and I'm just curious about your thoughts, because now you're about to have to face the world with this.
Yeah, well, from my point of view, for instance, if from my point of view, from a scholarly point of view, I shouldn't say scholarly, from an academic point of view, working within the politics of academia, it would have been much easier and much safer and much better for my, should we say, at least short-term career, if I had been able to go over there and prove that John Anthony West was wrong and read a short scholarly paper as to why John Anthony West was wrong and why the conventional Egyptologists were correct. It would have been much easier, too, if I had not found a chamber under the left paw of the Sphinx where this psychic named Edgar Cayce had predicted it, and if I had been able to say, well, no, he may have predicted that, but as we would expect in conventional academia, psychics don't know anything, and I can demonstrate that there really is nothing there. That would have made my life much easier. It turned out that was not the case, and I have to go with the real, genuine evidence. And the real, genuine evidence is that the Sphinx is much older, whether the Egyptologists like to hear that or not. And there really is a chamber where Edgar Cayce predicted there would be a chamber, whether people in, conventional status quo world want to hear that or not. Now, I do want to make it the very clear point with the chamber, which I continue to be very excited about, even a quarter century later, or more than a quarter century later now, because it hasn't been excavated, hasn't been probed. There's been a lot of hubbub about it, but it's never actually been looked into. And I think there's stuff in it. There are things in it. I actually think it's an archive. We now have hieroglyphic evidence just in the last year that refers to it, I believe, as an archive, as a library, a very, very ancient library that goes back, I believe, to prior to dynastic times. But I wanted to make the one point before I forget it. When we found seismically, geophysically, that chamber under the left paw of the Sphinx, I had heard of Edgar Cayce. I wasn't totally naive. I'm pretty up on things. But I didn't know anything about his prophecies. I didn't know anything about his predictions. I did not know he said there was a, quote, hall of records in Egypt anywhere, much less near the Sphinx. So it's not, as some people who have tried to badmouth me from conventional ivory tower academia have said, some have claimed that, I was there to prove him. No, I didn't even know about his prediction along these lines. We found it independently, and it was frankly a thorn in my side academically that he had predicted it.
That's what I figured. I figured it made your life more complicated for sure.
It made it more complicated. I mean, it really did, and it's made things complicated ever since, even to this day. There's more and more acceptance of the work in academia, especially with independent corroborative evidence like Göbekli Tepe, which you mentioned in the introduction. But on the other hand, there's still a lot of academics, Egyptologists in particular. Egyptologists are the worst in this respect, who don't want to look at the data, do not want to accept the evidence. And I find, too, if I could digress just for a little bit, I'm not alone when it comes to such things and Egyptologists. I don't know if you've spoken on your show about the big void and the Great Pyramid.
No, I was waiting to talk to you about that, actually.
Okay,
I was going to talk to Laird about it, but I decided to wait to talk to you about it.
Yeah, well, I'm probably I don't want to sound the wrong way. I'm probably the one to talk to about it.
No, for sure.
I'm a chief physicist. But the bottom line is, and we can talk more about it if you like, but I wanted to make one point right now, and that is that I've looked at all the raw data for it that I could get my hands on. I'm not involved in the project, so I'm independent of it, but I am a geophysicist. And this study, this data was generated by really top-notch physicists, many of them from Japan, some of them were French, etc. It was a joint international venture. I have no doubt whatsoever that their data, their raw data, is very, very, very good. It's using primarily muography, as it's called, which, we can get into the details if you wanted to. But the bottom line is it's good data. I think they have very good interpretations of it, and all the evidence is that there's a major chamber in the Great Pyramid that was previously undiscovered. Now, the point I want to make at the moment is this is very analogous to me finding something under the Sphinx. What happened in both cases, both the case with me and the case with the big void and the top-notch physicists, the Egyptologists start screaming and kicking, so to speak, and saying it's not there, there's nothing to it, it's nonsense. The latest term that the Egyptologists, the Egyptian Egyptologists, in fact the Ministry of Antiquities was using, is they're calling it propaganda. They can't accept that this is real science, this is real data. They call it propaganda as to dismiss it, and some of them even started calling for the whole project to be shut down. Why? Because they don't like the results. It doesn't fit their scenario. They don't want to be told that there's something new to be discovered. And to me, it's just ridiculous.
I don't understand it.
It really is. I don't understand. Well, I don't understand it from a scientific point of view. I do understand it, having worked in Egypt so long and so been there so often, dealing with people there. It's politics, and it's sort of like, well, if we didn't discover it, it can't be real, and if it doesn't conform to what we've always believed for the last 150 years, well, then it can't be the case, because they're very Egyptologists don't want to change their minds on things. If they believe something as a collective field for the last century, I find they don't want to change. They rather, they're very conservative that way.
But I would think that it would be, especially from a scientific point of view, anytime you find new evidence of something that as marvelous as that, I would think it would be great. That's why I've never understood the politics behind it. I understand that there is politics, but...
Okay, but you just said something, and I don't mean to pick on you, but it's wonderful from a scientific point of view. It's absolutely wonderful from a scientific point of view, but what you have to remember, and a lot of people don't realize this, and I don't mean this in any kind of nasty way whatsoever, what I'm about to say, Egyptologists on the whole are not scientists. They are not scientists. They're basically historians. Many of them come from either art history background, or they might come from a linguistics or comparative languages background, or a more social political science background. And they also have this concept that if you push things back earlier than dynastic Egypt, somehow it's not Egyptian, even though it's in Egypt. And if you start using scientific data to find new things which they haven't thought of or they aren't aware of, somehow it's stealing Egypt from the Egyptians. I've been accused of this. You're stealing Egypt from the Egyptians. You're making the Sphinx non-Egyptian. I said, no, it's still Egyptian. It's in Egypt. How do you define Egypt and Egyptian? When I was a graduate student, and I couldn't make this stuff up, and it's only significant to me after having experienced Egypt and working in Egypt. But when I was a graduate student, even before I wasn't involved in Egypt at the time, but one of the seminars I took, we just happened to read articles about Egyptology just as case studies and how Egyptologists were so resistant to using scientific data and incorporating it into their mode of thinking. And I thought this was sort of crazy, and I couldn't really believe Egyptologists were like that. But we read these studies and talked about the interaction between science and other disciplines, other academic fields. And lo and behold, I've experienced it now in my own career.
Right. Well, you did answer my question. It's not a scientific thing. I just.
Yeah, and again, I'm an academic, and Egyptology is a legitimate academic field, but a lot of people think Egyptologists are scientists. No, they're not on the whole. They may use scientific methods, like maybe, they send something out for radiocarbon dating, or they're very precise when they're excavating something, in some cases at least, but it's not inherently science.
Well, it seems to me that the fascinating part about it to me is I studied philosophy and, the mystery schools and all kinds of books. And someone like Plato, who was ahead of his time, obviously way ahead of his time, according to everybody that wrote about Plato, and all of these guys, they talked about these things. To me, it's really awesome to see that some of it's being validated. Now, I know you bring up the words like, Atlantis and stuff, and that's controversial in itself too. But, I mean, that's just a name for, I believe, a society that we're discovering that may have been here way before what we know. That's all it is.
No, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up Atlantis, because if you hadn't, I would have if I remembered to. In my career, I did not talk about Atlantis for a number of years. So in the early 1990s, when I was first working with John Anthony West, and this ties in with what you were asking before, how did I view it, what did I say, the implications. Back then, and still to this day, but I'm beyond it now, I just talk about Atlantis, and here we are talking on the radio about Atlantis. Back then, I would not say the word Atlantis publicly, because if you said Atlantis from an academic point of view, if you were a scientist, people tended to dismiss you. They tended to say, oh, he's an Atlantis hunter, ha, 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 and then just dismiss everything you said. And I've never been one for trying to pinpoint Atlantis geographically. What I think is important about the Atlantis story, which Plato, of course, ultimately got from Egypt, is that we're talking about, and Plato was talking about, a very sophisticated society technological civilization that went back to a very early period. And as you just said, we now have evidence of this. More importantly and precisely from my point of view, Plato, when you date Atlantis, according to Plato's account, using our modern chronology, Plato dated Atlantis to about 9600 BC, the destruction of Atlantis about 9600 BC. That is within 100 years, the modern geological dating of the end of the Ice Age and the destruction of this earlier cycle of civilization, including the civilization that built the original Sphinx or carved the original Sphinx and built Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, etc., that was destroyed, decimated with the end of the last Ice Age, 9700 BC. Plato, in a roundabout, estimate, gives 9600 BC. I don't think it's coincidence. I don't think it's just a coincidence that they're so close. I think Plato actually knew what he was talking about, and in particular the time frame of how far back this went. It had been passed down with veracity. It was people knew what they were talking about in classical ancient times when it came to even talking about these earlier cycles, these earlier ancient civilizations.
And there lies a greater mystery. How did they know?
Exactly. How did they know it? What was passed down? I mean, this ties in with something else that I find fascinating. I'm just going to give another example. Go to Australia. The Australian Aborigines, they've passed down myths and traditions, whatever people want to call it, and they talk about, for instance, islands off of Australia where their ancestors hunted this or that animal. This was dismissed as absolute nonsense or just, myths that they made up until fairly recently when geology, again, has demonstrated, no, there really were islands out there that really did have certain animals on them, just as the traditions state. But lo and behold, those islands haven't existed for 10, 12,000 years since the end of the last Ice Age. Yet those traditions have been passed down orally, have been passed down verbally, and it's very easy to, I think, us in our modern literate age to underestimate how strong oral traditions can be and how truthful, how they can pass down real information over what seem like innumerable generations.
Right. That's amazing to me, too. But I want to talk about, we got to take our first break. We're already halfway through the show. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the solar outburst as well as your tours of Egypt as well. So you guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Dr. Robert Schoch.
This is Preston Dennett from PrestonDennett.weebly.com, and you're listening to KTLK, The Fringe FM.
Do you or a loved one suffer migraine headaches? Listen to what scientist Kurt Hendricks has to say.
35 million people in the United States suffer with debilitating migraines. If you or a loved one are one of them, you need to know about MigraLief. Hi, I'm Kurt Hendricks, the scientist that formulated and patented the MigraLief migraine formula. MigraLief is a non-prescription dietary supplement recommended by neurologists, pharmacists, and pediatricians to address nutritional deficiencies in both adults and children over 2 with migraines. Try MigraLief for 3 months and see the powerful difference it can make in your life, or get your money back, no questions asked. Go to MIG911.com or call 800-MIG-7354. You can change your life today.
So if you suffer from migraines, don't wait. Call 800-MIG-7354. That's 800-MIG-7354 or visit MIG911.com.
Natural Health Solutions with Chris and Ronnie.
Hey, Ronnie, how you doing?
Great, Chris.
Now, you're the CEO of GetTheTea.com, right?
Yes, I am.
What is GetTheTea.com? I mean, is this tea you buy in a store?
Well, no, it's not. Life Change Tea is just that, life-changing. Life Change Tea is an herbal tea that gently cleanses your body from intruders.
What do you mean by intruders?
Well, intruders are toxins, chemicals, GMOs, heavy metals, and more. They're in our food, in our water, in our air we breathe.
Seriously?
Yeah, seriously.
And Life Change Tea will help you with removing these, as you say, intruders?
That's right, Chris.
Are there side effects with this tea?
Well, you might lose a little weight. When you clean your colon, you lose weight, you feel better, and you have more energy.
Wow. Ronnie, where can people purchase Life Change Tea?
Oh, that's easy. GetTheTea.com. That's GetTheTea.com.
Ronnie, I want to thank you for being on the show. People, don't forget, GetTheTea.com.
So, you love talk radio? Then you'll love TalkStreamLive.com. TalkStream Live is always on, 24/7, with the best streaming talk shows. Find your favorite talkers and discover some new ones. It's free, readily available online or on mobile with any smartphone or tablet. Finding your favorite talk shows all in one place has gotten a whole lot easier. Just go to TalkStreamLive.com. Be sure to download the free apps from Google Play or the iTunes App Store.
Tired of talking about the weather? No, Shift. Well, Shift Happens is here to fulfill your desires as you reach that point in life where you crave tantalizing conversation about reality, ufology, the occult, and the conspiracies within, while simultaneously finding yourself desperately in need of your very own theme music, which we've got plenty of that too. So be sure to tune in to Shift Happens every Friday night from 7 to 9 Pacific, right here on the Fringe FM. Because the weather sucks, and you need some theme music.
Hey Fringe FM listeners, guess what? TalkStream Live has just released a new paranormal app exclusively for the paranormal community called Paranormal Radio. Paranormal Radio has a great selection of streaming talk shows dealing with UFOs, the supernatural, sacred geometry, NDEs, and much more, including a network highly recommended, The Fringe FM. You can download Paranormal Radio right now from Google Play and the iTunes App Store.
Hi, folks. CBD is the home run hitter for health right now. Why, you ask? Because of what it does for the body. Unfortunately, I can't tell you all about the benefit. You know, there's reasons. Do your due diligence and log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com. Ancient Life Oil uses organic ingredients and is blended in coconut oil for some of the best benefits. Legal in 50 states and non-psychoactive. Log on to AncientLifeOil.com. That's AncientLifeOil.com.
Select Joe Roop at checkout at AncientLifeOil.com.
This is Lighting the Void Radio with your host, Joseph Roop. It's the show about truth-seeking and freeing the spirit, shattering your limited beliefs, revealing hidden truths, and much, much more.
All right, welcome back to Lighting the Void. Thank you for listening. If you're just tuning in, we're live on the Fringe FM. We're here with Dr. Robert Schoch. It's been an interesting conversation, so we're going to continue this conversation. Don't forget, Saturday night, I'll be hosting it Spaced Out Saturday, so come hang out with me there if you're not doing anything. I was talking to you about this during the break, and I want to mention this, too, to everyone, because I know there are others that felt this way. After when I had John Anthony West on the show, and we had talked about going to Egypt, and I told him it was a dream of mine, Dr. Schoch, and others as well, and he was, he understood that, and, his passing kind of, to me, it was like, okay, well, that thing on my bucket list, it's no longer there, I don't have it anymore. When I found out about that you were going to continue the tours, that lifted for me. I'm so excited to hear that.
Yeah, I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased that you feel that way, and I've actually had other people say that to me too. Just to fill people in if they're not aware of it, and I know you're aware of this, but I'll fill in the audience. John Anthony West, of course, got sick. Well, he and I were colleagues, for over a quarter century. We traveled to Egypt quite a bit together. We worked together in Egypt independently, and a lot of people may not realize this. I would have done tours to Egypt and elsewhere, Turkey, Peru, Bolivia, Easter Island, So I've actually been doing tours not as consistently as John Anthony West did. I wouldn't necessarily do them every year, but to different places over the years. In fact, not to go into too much detail, back in my youth when I was in college, I was actually a travel agent. So
cool.
I have some, real experience in this on both ends. But because John Anthony West was so sick I'm getting my years mixed up. I guess it was last year.
Right.
He was so sick he could not do the final trip that he had planned. He didn't know it was going to be the final trip. No one knew it was. But there was a group of people that had signed up, and it was either cancel the trip or, could something else be worked out? And I stepped in and gratis, for the family. And for John, my very, very close and dear friend, took that trip over. And I was sort of almost, I want to say, schizophrenic, because we'd go to the sites and I didn't try, I'm not the type that would try to imitate John Anthony West and pretend to be him, but I would give his point of view and the symbolist interpretation and talk about Schwaller and say all the things I knew he would say and would want people to hear if he were there. And of course I added my own interpretations and analysis and talked about how he and I had talked about the various sites, and I think it went off very, very well. In fact, people told me it did. So I have, I guess, the distinction of having done the last official John Anthony West trip in his place, which was very meaningful to me. And yes, if I could put it this way, I'm planning to continue the legacy and continue it. So those who didn't get to go with him, I feel silly saying this or bad saying this, but can I just say bluntly, maybe the next best thing is to come with me.
It would be. There's nobody that disagrees with that.
Yeah, and I'm also very proud. I got to say this because it's meaningful to me. He was in total denial that he wasn't going to do this trip, what turned out to be or should have been his last trip. This was February, March. I've got the dates now correct. February, March 2017. So about a year ago, and up until maybe 2 weeks before the trip, he's in intensive care. He's lying in the hospital, and he's talking to his family, to his adult son, who I, of course, know very well. I've known him all his life, knew him when he was born, and saying, no, he's in denial. And I don't know that he was thinking straight at that point, because the cancer had invaded his brain, among other things, and I felt so bad for him. But he was saying, no, he would be good enough. He would be able to, somehow leave the hospital and give this trip. And he was in total denial, and eventually the family had to tell him that, no, he couldn't be doing it. And they said, well, Schoch. He always called me Schoch. I always called him West. And he said, well, Schoch is going to do it for you. And apparently his comment was to the effect, well, the only person in the world that could do it in his place was me. And that made me feel very good that he had that confidence.
Well, it makes me feel good to know that my bucket list is still there, because it is something I want to do. I really do.
Exactly. And I think John Anthony West would feel the same way, that he would like people to still go to Egypt, still, have that experience, because it's an important, as far as I'm concerned, it's an important experience. He certainly felt that way, that it's a life-changing, life-altering experience for certainly everyone I know that's ever been to Egypt. I don't want to make any promises, but
sure,
it is. And so many people, they go once, then they go again, and they go again, and they go again, because it really is that powerful.
A man such as yourself, a scholar, I do want to ask you this, a spiritual question. When I get around Egyptology, whether it's symbology, even when I went to Las Vegas and was at the Luxor, which is, incorrect, a lot of their stuff in there it is.
Oh, yeah, but I like, it's fun, though. I've been there. It's fun.
Right. When I get around that stuff, I can't imagine, I get this feeling of something that I know inside of me. I don't know what it is, but it's some kind of nostalgia. I can't even put a word for it or describe it, but it's some type of feeling that I get of I can't think of the word that makes me feel like maybe I've been there before or something, but it energizes me. I can't imagine what it's like to be in Egypt for the first time.
Oh, yeah, you will love it. Because I'm saying you and I talked about this over the break. You haven't actually been there. You have to come with us. You will love it. If you got that from going to Las Vegas to Luxor, I mean, you'll have it orders of magnitude, 1,000 or more times more powerfully when you're actually in Egypt, when you're actually in the temples, when you're actually walking there yourself. I mean, it is such a experience, and I feel that every time I go. And I mean, I long ago lost track of how many times I've been to Egypt, but it really is genuine, and it's really something that was designed, and something that John Anthony West and I now often talk about and will describe on site, is how these structures were they were designed to instill that. This is not just a random thing. And I mean, they knew what they were doing in ancient times. There's incredible sophistication to the architecture, to the art, etc. And that's very real. That's very genuine. It's not just one's imagination.
Extremely powerful experience, I imagine.
Very powerful. I remember having one, and I never guarantee anything. And I remember having one person, she was going to Egypt with me, and she so badly wanted to, have some kind of spiritual, powerful experience. And I don't promise things like that to people, because everyone's different, and you can't. What's really good for one person is not necessarily what's really good for another person. But there is so much in Egypt. I found that everyone who's ever traveled with me there has come back changed. And I was thinking of this one woman who, she was so intent on having that, and that actually scared me, because sometimes when you're too intent on having a certain type of experience, you may destroy it for yourself.
Sure.
But she came back, and she had even more than she had bargained for, should we say? Which is real.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And genuine. Yeah.
I'm really excited to hear this stuff. The void, beneath the Sphinx. There's other material besides Edgar Casey that talks about this, and some of it's channeled.
Oh yes,
you
that's
can't
right.
really put, I would say, credibility to some of it, but it is a very odd coincidence, right? That there's so many texts about something underneath the Sphinx.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things, and there's all kinds of. I will tell you my own evolution and study of these things as I've got into Egypt and the ancient cultures and whatnot. Things that I used to dismiss. When I say used to dismiss, I'm talking 30 or more years ago now. When I was in graduate school, things like the mystery schools and the quote secret societies and groups like that. I mean, there's a lot to it, and there are a lot of traditions, I think, that have come down. Some of them, a little obscure. Some of them, should we say, degraded? I'm not sure exactly which term. But there are a lot of things that have come down from ancient times, even if they're adulterated a little bit, where there's cores there. And many of them originate from ancient Egypt or before. Just to mention one slight digression, people may be familiar with Gurdjieff. John Anthony West was very much a student of the Gurdjieff work, that type of thing. And it's something that we spent a lot of time talking about. And one of the traditions is that that really comes from a very ancient tradition that goes back thousands of years, goes back well before dynastic times, not just in Egypt but elsewhere, and something that Gurdjieff, West and I used to talk about this, John Anthony West and I used to talk about this, how Gurdjieff talks at one point about, ancient maps of pre-Sahara Egypt. Well, in fact, we've demonstrated this. We've sort of demonstrated the reality of that.
Yeah, I remember when I talked to him about that, because I've studied Gurdjieff too, and when he talked about it, he was kind of slow to bring it up, but you can tell that he was very proud to have talked about it, and I could tell that he was very proud of him being a part of that. And that, Gurdjieff is all about the mysticism school, and I had no idea that he was into that. I knew he was a spiritual person, but I had no idea how deep it really was with John until he brought that up, and you could see it in his eyes how proud he was to talk about it.
Exactly. No, he was. That was actually a very important part of his life. He didn't always bring it up, or he wasn't always quick to bring it up or to talk about, but was, and I think it ties in with this bigger picture.
Sure, yeah, it definitely does. Now I want to move into your work as far as the solar events. Is this a term that you came up with?
Before we leave that, can I just put a plug in?
Oh, absolutely.
And it's a plug. It's a plug for Egypt trips.
Sure. Yeah.
So right now, people should check periodically. I am planning, when I say we, Katie and I, and it's actually going to be through Oracle, which is the Organization for the Research of Ancient Cultures, which is a not-for-profit organization. It's official not-for-profit, whatever it is, 401, or I forget what the number is, IRS number.
Right.
But we're a genuine not-for-profit. It was established to carry on the legacy and the research, that type of thing, along these lines. So we're going to do it through that, and we are planning the next real, trip that we would like people to join us who are interested for May of 2019. You and I talked about this during the break off the air. It'll be May of 2019. It's not been officially posted yet, because we're still pricing it out and getting all the details together, but we hope to have that posted within a couple of weeks, so people can start planning. And the way they can find out about it is that I will have it posted on my website, www.robertschoch, and that's ROBERTSCHOCH.com. And in the meantime, if people are listening and they want to make sure that they hear about it immediately, once we have everything firmly set, they can send me a message through my website.
Yeah, and I also have the links there on the article and show notes as well about that.
Wonderful.
I apologize. I did want to bring that up too to make sure. So you're planning for May of 2019. Pretty much.
Yes, May of 2019. So about a year and a few months from now, which gives people plenty of time to plan and to make arrangements, that type of thing. It also gives me time to get all the arrangements together in Egypt, and then have a good period of time when people can sign up and whatnot.
I would love to go with some of my audience members here. A few of them I can know for sure. That would be great.
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful.
How big of a group do you plan on taking? I know John had a set number of people that he...
we're probably talking, to make it realistic and whatnot, I found, because I've done a number of trips, I found that a group of 25 to 35 is actually quite ideal. Sometimes people think that sounds like a little bit on the high side, but no, it's actually not, because it works well with group dynamics and for people circulating and everything. But I also want to keep it small enough that we're always all together, for instance, on the bus together, etc., and I get to see everyone. And it gives us good prices on hotels and that type of thing. So I would say somewhere in that range. And I do want to point out that when I do trips, and this will be no exception, we include everything in the price, every single meal, etc.
Okay, that's
so
cool.
People, it's not one of these things, and I told you off the air, I used to be a travel agent decades ago when I was in college, and it irks me no end. I hate to say it that way, but it does. When you see advertised trips and then you read the fine print, it doesn't include most of the meals. It doesn't include this, that, and the other thing. So it ends up costing you a lot more than you really expect. I don't do that. Everything. Of course, you have to have some money if you want to buy souvenirs on the side, but I include everything.
Oh, I can imagine. I would see when I'll tell you, like I told John, Dr. Schoch, is I would be afraid that once I went, that I would be hooked. He told me I would be. He said you'd start going every year. Well, if you just go once, you'll get hooked.
Nothing wrong with being hooked on Egypt.
Right. Well, exactly. I want to see I know we've been talking about this a lot, but I see the pictures. I want to see that night desert sky, with that pyramid there, and look at that.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful, gorgeous sight. And when you see the desert and you see the night sky from Egypt, it's just, people in America don't know what it looks like because we have so much, I'm getting scientific here, we have so much light pollution, etc. Even when you think you're out away from the city, you still have so much ambient light and pollution and light pollution, other pollution, etc. But to be out in the desert and see the sky and maybe see the pyramids and the backdrop, it's a spiritual. We were talking about this before, but that itself is a spiritual experience.
Right. And I believe that they knew that. Something tells me that they knew that these structures, these symbols, the power of it would play upon your subconscious and soul. I know they knew something about that.
Oh, absolutely. And I've got to say, another digression in my career, and something I'm very interested in, is psychological and psychic, genuine psychic phenomena. And something I became interested in this through my work in Egypt, because it's just as you say, they knew these things, and they talk about it in the text, the hieroglyphic text, etc. And for my own benefit, for my own curiosity, I start looking into these things, and were they just a bunch of BS, so to speak, and they were just pulling the wool over the eyes of the believers? I'm talking thousands of years ago. Or is there something real to this? No, it's absolutely real. I mean, they knew what they were talking about. They knew human psyche. Well,
when we talk
they were much better informed about these things than most people are today.
Absolutely. And when we talk about technology, Dr. Schoch, we think iPads and computers and stuff like that, but I think that they understood a different kind of technology.
Oh, very much so. They understood a different type of technology, and if John Anthony West were still here, he might start talking along these lines too, because he and I talked about this quite a bit. They knew a technology, if we could call it sort of a spiritual technology, or a technology that ties in with the spirit, ties in with the divine, ties in with the soul, ties in with our psychic needs, which, you can have the greatest iPads and that type of technology, computers, yet your soul, your spirit is devoid.
True that. I believe that so much. Now, this term, I do want to get into this work a little bit. Well, I'll ask you one more question about this, because it's been bothering me to no end. John Anthony West discovered this erosion and came to you about it. Sometimes I
well,
wonder...
actually, let me correct you, because he would say this if he were here. He didn't actually discover it. The one who should really get credit for discovering it is Schwaller de Lubitsch.
Right, that's right.
So Schwaller de Lubitsch and then John Anthony West recognized the significance of it, which Schwaller really never seemed to have put together how significant it was. And then John Anthony West came to me as a trained geologist, geophysicist, to evaluate it scientifically.
Right, that's right. So my thing is, do you think that someone else knew this and they just passed it by? I mean, how could we not have seen this?
Yeah, that I've asked myself many times. How could we have not seen this? I think that, well, it's hard to say. It's really, really hard to say. Some of the geologists who worked in Egypt probably did see it, but didn't even think much about it because they're not Egyptologists. They were just strict geologists. Many geologists, my scientific colleagues, when I've presented this at geological conferences and whatnot, they've said to me, how did the Egyptologists miss this? And my comment is basically, well, they're not geologists. And, there haven't been many geologists that have actually worked in Egypt with this in mind. Most of the Egyptologists have been working, most of the geologists working in Egypt have been doing other things. They've been looking for oil or, whatever, mineral exploitation, that type of thing. They're not really worried about the Sphinx and how old is the Sphinx, and they might not even think about that. So it's a strange question. It's not a strange question, it's a strange topic. Why didn't anyone ever really see this before and put two and two together? Because it's not difficult to do. But what is difficult, and this may be part of the answer to your question, is the implications are profound. And when the implications of something are profound, there's a psychological, breakdown in psychological mechanism that you then want to deny the evidence. And that's exactly what I see in many of my academic colleagues. That's very simple, straightforward evidence, and it seems almost too simple, and therefore, in a way, they feel they can deny it.
That's what I was thinking, that they just didn't want to deal with it in their mind, or they questioned it immediately.
Exactly. They just questioned it. In some cases, it may have been, at least initially, before, and I'll take credit for this, really bring it to my academics, the attention of my academics before bringing it to the attention of my academic colleagues, in a sense, they could almost question it unconsciously and just dismiss it without really talking about it or even thinking about it blatantly, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's what I was. I was really thinking that too.
West does tell the story, or used to tell the story sometimes, that he did approach a couple of other geologists before I was approached, and in several cases it was very clear that the geologists saw the implications and wanted nothing to do with it, and basically would not help and walked away because it's not a battle that they wanted to fight, because they were geologists. They didn't really care about Egyptology that much, and they didn't want to make their lives miserable with such a thing. I was maybe young and naive, and I didn't think it was going to make my life quite so miserable from an academic point of view. When I say miserable, I've come under a lot of heat from my academic colleagues over the years. I feel like I'm now being vindicated.
Right.
But in the early years, it was really, really tough. I had people wanting to have me fired, even though I was tenured, because I didn't get involved in this until I was tenured. I wasn't that dumb. And, it has hurt me, from an academic point of view in that sense.
Well, Dr. Schoch, I can take my tinfoil hat off and tip it to you, and I appreciate you stepping out there and doing that. A lot of us do. I know it wasn't easy. I'm just the first time I've ever got to talk to you, so I've always wondered There's lots of things we can talk about, but I always wondered what it was like for you to go through that, some of the questions you had, and you've answered some of those for me, so I really appreciate that.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
We are actually on our last break here, guys. It's going by.
Okay, and then
go ahead.
We'll come back after the break?
Yes, sir. Yeah, we got one more section left to talk about, and you guys, it's robertschoch.com. All the links are there on the website, and you guys don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with Dr. Robert Schoch.
Hi, it's Jeremy Scott, and I'm the program director for the network you're listening to right now. We are the Fringe FM. You've probably noticed some changes around here lately, but what we really want is to hear from you. If you like it, hate it, or you want some more, let us know. Email talkback@thefringe.fm. Leave us your thoughts by calling 501-777-5631 or message our Facebook page at The Fringe FM. This is the new Fringe FM. We rock the paranormal talk.
Kids, don't drink and park. Accidents cause people. This has been a PSA brought to you by your friends at Shift Happens and The Fringe FM.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
You guys rock! Live weekdays on the Fringe FM. It's Spaced Out Radio with Dave Scott. Monday through Friday at 9 Pacific, midnight Eastern. The Fenton Perspective with Lori and Fenton. Mondays at 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern. Project Compass with Mark Eddy and Dave Cruz. Mondays at 7 Pacific, 10 Eastern. Lighting the Void with Joe Rube. Tuesdays and Wednesday nights at 7 Pacific, 10 Eastern. Big Picture Science from the SETI Institute. New Tuesdays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern. The Secret Teachings with Ryan Gable. Wednesdays at 1 Pacific, 4 Eastern. The Kurt Green Hour, Wednesdays at midnight, 3 a.m. Eastern. The Paranormal Code with Rich Giordano, Thursdays at 7 Pacific, 10 Eastern. Shift Happens with Gigi and Cortana, Friday at 7 Pacific, 10 Eastern.
Is it live?
Live, weekdays on the Fringe FM. We rock the paranormal talk. On the Fringe FM app, TalkStream Live, tune in, and online at thefringe.fm.
Psychic Sundays, spiritual communication, ET contact, Sasquatch in your backyard. We will have it all on Cosmic Passport with me, Elizabeth Anglin. Each Sunday, starting at 9 p.m. Pacific, midnight Eastern, at spacedoutradio.com, I will take you on a journey of enlightenment. The goal is learning from the soul on out. We'd love it if you joined our experience, Cosmic Passport.
Live Sunday nights at 9 Pacific, midnight Eastern on the Fringe FM. We rock the paranormal talk.
Hi, this is Ryan Gable, host of the Secret Teachings radio show. If you are interested in ancient knowledge and hidden mysteries, as well as a unique and balanced perspective on conspiracies, symbols, and the occult, then join me every Saturday, Sunday, and Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on The Fringe.
Paranormal, somewhere between abnormal and paranormal.
The U.S. military holds the ability to time travel.
Jeremy Scott asks the questions that we're all dying to know.
Wow, that's a remarkable question.
Watch your step. Hide under your blankets.
The show that is going to make you think.
Prepare yourself for what you're about to hear.
This transmission is coming to you.
You're riding into the paranormal.
Live Saturday nights at 6 Pacific, 9 Eastern on KTLK, The Fringe FM.
Welcome back to Lighting the Void. We are live on the Fringe FM. I am Joe Roop. And don't forget, if you go to the website, there's all kinds of cool stuff there. Actually, we've got planetary alignments. You can sign up for the newsletter, the articles here. Also, we're here with Dr. Robert Schoch, and the show notes are there as well as website links. We've been talking about ancient Egypt, the tours that he's doing, all kinds of cool stuff. And I really appreciate your time, Dr. Schoch. I know you're a busy man, so I do appreciate your time hanging out with us.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Now, I wanted to get into this just a little bit while we got time here. This, and I'm not trying to scare the audience. I don't, just like you, I don't believe in, fear-mongering or anything like that. But it's a very important subject that you talk about on your website and in your work. And you've, this term, I don't know if you came up with it. Did you come up with this term, the solar-induced dark age, or SIDA?
No. The person that came up with that was Katie, my wife.
Really? Okay.
She said, we have to have a name. And she's right. You have to have a name so that people can talk about things, just like we talk about the Renaissance or dynastic Egypt. So she actually came up with SIDA. We call it SIDA, S-I-D-A, which stands for Solar-Induced Dark Age. And it's sort of ironic because the sun, inducing a dark age, rather than a light age. I'd love to talk about that.
Now, this, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, according to your theory, these solar outbursts are what causes these, these mass deluges that we have during certain cycles.
Correct.
According to, before that, what caused that ice age, possibly, right?
Yes. Essentially, to put it, let's talk about the last SIDA, the last solar-induced dark age, because my thinking is that there's probably been a number of them if you go back in time, but we can't prove that definitively yet. But we do know that the Ice Age ended 9700 BC, so the world was a very different world before 9700 BC. There were major glaciers at high latitudes. Places that are now desert were temperate or even very lush with vegetation and animals, that type of thing. In 9700 BC, so almost 12,000 years ago, there was a massive change on Earth. There was massive climatic changes. We have this recorded precisely in ice cores from Greenland, in particular from sediment cores around the world, from lunar data that was first collected by the Apollo missions, where you can pick this up. Looking at isotopes and whatnot and all this data. And what we have is a major climatic change which snapped us out of the Ice Age. And I want to make the point that based on the latest data, when I was a graduate school, when I was a graduate student in graduate school at Yale, we thought that the Ice Age ended very suddenly, but we were thinking in terms of centuries. That was very sudden geologically.
Right.
Then it turned out maybe 10, 12 years ago that data came out that maybe the Ice Age ended in only a few years. Then data came out that ended in less than a year. And the most recent data is that it ended, as far as we can resolve it, within just a couple of weeks, but probably, and we just can't resolve it that precisely in the ice cores, probably literally overnight. So you're talking incredibly suddenly. What could cause us to go from very cold to very hot so suddenly? A solar outburst, the sun erupting, and the isotope data says that's exactly what happened. There's petroglyphs, carvings on rock by ancient people that show what was happening in the sky. Basically, they saw figures that looked like dancing figures. I don't want to try to get into too much detail here, but I talk about in Forgotten Civilization. This is reflected in legends around the world. And getting back to what you were talking about, the deluges, the torrential rains, flood legends around the world, I think originate from this time period. Well, what happened is that when you have a major solar outburst, in some cases, what's known as plasma or electrically charged particles moving at incredibly high speeds from a coronal mass ejection given off by the sun hit Earth. This hit Earth in certain places would actually come down, penetrate through the atmosphere, would mess up the magnetosphere, etc., but in some cases it would penetrate down in what you might have seen, what would look like huge thunderbolts or lightning bolts hitting the Earth. So you'd have these huge plasma discharges. If this hits, for instance, ice, glaciers at high latitudes, it would melt them very quickly. Hits water, it would evaporate water. Where it hits on the land, it might cause massive wildfires. It would cause vitrification, the melting of surface rock, which then congeals again. I was just in Niger earlier this month doing some field work where we found vitrification like that. We found that elsewhere around the world, dating back to this time period. So all the data is tying together. But getting to the torrential rains, when you start melting these glaciers suddenly, raising temperatures around the world, evaporating all this water, the atmosphere becomes super saturated, and it comes back out as rain. It comes back out as precipitation. I now hypothesize that this is what caused some of the massive erosion, water weathering, water erosion on the Sphinx itself. At the end of the last ice age. So you have torrential rains, you have massive wildfires, you have volcanic activity that's actually set off by this solar cycles actually modulate volcanic and earthquake activity that's being demonstrated now. And also when you melt huge glaciers, that relieves pressure on the surface of the Earth, which causes more volcanic and earthquake activity. So all these things were happening. Radiation levels were very high on the surface of the Earth. So it was really a massive catastrophe, destroyed the civilizations of the time, just as Plato described with the fall of Atlantis. You know, he did somewhat maybe metaphorically or in a literary sense, but he was basically right. And it threw civilization into a dark age. So this is why Katie in particular, came up with the acronym SIDA, Solar-Induced Caused by the Sun Dark Age, which wiped out the high civilizations that had existed. So from about 9700 BC, the end of the last ice age, until the reemergence of civilization between 4000 and 3000 BC, we have what we refer to as SIDA, the solar-induced dark age. And when you look at the remains from that period, it's nothing like what we have before. You have sites, for instance, Çatalhöyük, and I sometimes take people to Turkey on tours to Turkey, and we will go and visit these sites. You have something like Çatalhöyük, which is, 6,000, 7,000 BC in the height of SIDA, and you have a bunch of mud brick buildings that are all built crowded next to each other, no megalithic stone structures at all, very depauperate, very much a lower technology than what we see thousands of years earlier at places like the Sphinx and the buildings associated with the Sphinx, places like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, where you have incredibly beautifully carved stone pillars going back 12,000 years before the catastrophe hit.
What an anomaly place, right? What an anomaly. I said, what an anomaly that place is.
But it shows it's an earlier cycle of civilization before you had this catastrophe. So civilization went into this dark age, this period of decline for thousands of years, and it was only 5,000-6,000 years ago that it reemerged again, essentially the equivalent of the Renaissance in Europe in the 15th century after Dark Age. And lo and behold, the ancient Egyptians, as well as other traditions 5,000 years ago, they talked about this earlier cycle, not just with the myth of Atlantis or the tradition of Atlantis, but they talked about what in Egypt they called Zep Tepi, the first time, which we can now date back to the end of the last ice age. This was, for them, the earlier cycle of civilization. They talked about this. Of course, traditional historians, status quo Egyptologists have dismissed this as nonsense. The Egyptians, and we go and we'll see this in Egypt. I show this to people when I take them to Egypt. We'll see lists of kings going back to this remote period, which, the traditional Egyptologists just dismiss that and say this is all mythology. This is all nonsense. Somehow the Egyptologists of today know better about ancient Egyptian history than the ancient Egyptians did, which has always amazed me, the hubris that they can have. But yeah, it's a very important concept, very important period, and very important because, as we alluded to earlier in the show today, this is going to happen again. There's no doubt in my mind. We are a civilization, but civilizations come and go. We do not have control over the sun. We are incredibly vulnerable, more vulnerable to a solar outburst now, I think, than they were 12,000 years ago. Why? Because of our technology. We have a technology based on microelectronics, a technology based on, communication satellites, technology based on electrical grid systems. All of these will collapse with a major solar outburst. Solar outburst will set up electric currents in the grid systems around the world. This happened. We know this happens because in 1859 there was a very minor solar outburst known as the Carrington effect. At that time in 1859, there were only telegraph systems as far as electrical, infrastructure on Earth, telegraph systems used by the wealthy, in governments, that type of thing. They burnt out. They acted as huge conductors, as antennae. Telegraph stations burnt down. They were destroyed. It didn't affect most people because most people weren't using electricity. Nowadays, think about it. Everyone uses electricity, and when that all goes down, I mean, most people, a little bit billions around the world could die. I mean, I hate to be crude, but that's the blunt truth.
A little bit of woodsmanship and learning some natural survival skills might help, but I would say that, the little bit of stuff that we've seen that the sun can do, if we get a massive solar outburst, I don't think you can bury yourself far enough away from it.
No, I don't think so. In fact, I'm one, if people really ask me about this, I'm one that says, you're not going to survive by trying to run to the woods or to the hills with a gun and beans and rice. And, also we have nuclear power plants around the world. If you cut off power to them, we're going to have Fukushima-type situations around the world spewing radiation. We're talking a bad situation. I actually think the best way to prepare, and I don't mean to sound corny here, but is sort of spiritually and also just having a system of, friends and community, that type of thing that can try to band together.
Sure.
I think one of the scariest things will be people, who don't have the right, should we say, mental framework, spirituality, social bonds, philosophy, whatever you want to call it. They start all getting scared and then turning on each other.
Right. Do you think that, there's nothing that we can do to stop it? Are we?
You're not going to stop the sun,
right?
But you can try to be less dependent on, some of the. We're so. Again, it's hard for an individual to do anything. Collectively, at least, we can try to. They call it hardening the infrastructure against such things, so that it's not quite so vulnerable to. Basically electromagnetic pulses, that type of thing. But the problem is there's actually a term for it. We're in a progress trap. We've made such incredible progress on one hand with our electronics and communication systems, etc., that we can't, work around it. We can't do anything outside of it. We're trapped by our own progress. We're trapped by our own infrastructure.
Yeah, that's true. there's a lot of talk. I've heard Dr. Mikio Kaku and others talk about things of interplanetary, like moving to another planet and stuff. And I mean, I can understand that need for survival, but
that's totally unrealistic
sure.
right now. It's totally unrealistic. And I will tell you, I'll say something else along those lines. A lot of the people who talk about things like that are, astronomers.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to sound nasty about some of my academic colleagues, but they don't know even the most fundamental things about certain other fields. If you're going to go colonize Mars, for instance, and that would probably be the easiest one to colonize, you've got to take an entire ecosystem there. To take an ecosystem there and establish it and keep it balanced is virtually impossible. And I say this not to throw out credentials, but I say this as someone who, among other things, over the years, if you look into me, I'm a co-author on college environmental science textbook, which we just went into its edition 6. Very successful book, and I know about ecology, environmental issues. We can't even keep our own ecologies stable on Earth. We're destroying our own ecologies. To try to set up a stable, sustainable ecology on a alien planet, it's just not. There's a chance of 1 in a trillion that we could actually do it.
It's
because
like
there's
wasted
so
brain
many
cycles,
variables involved. What?
It's like wasted brain cycles to even think about it, I think, to try to do it.
Yeah. And there's other things. For instance, there's things called Schumann resonances on Earth. And I only bring this up because you'll go insane if you aren't subjected to Schumann resonances, which, you'd have to set up artificially on another planet. It's a very low frequency, long wavelength electromagnetic field that is in the background, but it affects our brains, it affects our brain waves, that type of thing. So there's all these things you have to take into account that, that really we should just not mess up our own planet.
That's true.
Yeah.
I think you guys should go get this book because there's only 17 left. I just ordered, it said only 18 left. I just ordered one, so there's only 17 left.
Okay, well, everyone should buy it, and then hopefully they'll get more in. But yeah, grab it now.
It's a massive, you got stellar reviews on this book and your other books as well, too, but I'm very interested in this.
This is the book to buy. If people are going to buy one book of mine, it should be Forgotten Civilization.
So what is your, we only got a few minutes left here, but I do want to ask you this. Why do you think Göbekli Tepe it's the oldest thing that we know of, but there's nothing else on this planet to relate to? I think we're going to find more. I think we are finding more. I think we're going to find more. This is something I'm working on as well as other people. Göbekli Tepe is an astounding site. It's about the same age as my dating on the Sphinx, but the thing about Göbekli Tepe is it's pristine because it was purposefully buried at the end of the last ice age. Unlike the Sphinx, which, then sat around, got used and reused and mucked about, to use a non-technical term, and was recarved. But Göbekli Tepe was buried, and I think it was buried by the people at the end of the last ice age as all these catastrophes were occurring because they wanted to preserve it. Maybe they intended to come back and restore it. Maybe they just left it for posterity. At Göbekli Tepe, you can see actually where the pillars were knocked over, then re-erected, and hastily buried. But getting to your point, Göbekli Tepe was really the height of a civilization, I believe. And I think as we go back in time and as we find more and more and are open to finding more and more, and I think this is very important because scholars aren't always open to finding new things. As we go back, I think my prediction is we're going to find more sophisticated things at an earlier period. The problem is two. One is physical.
and I'm speaking now again as a geologist, as you go back in time, exponentially there's less and less, going down exponentially. There's less and less that survives because, as you go back in time, more and more things have been destroyed by natural processes as well as human, destruction. So there's a lot less. Even in Egypt, when we go to Egypt, you'll see that there's Ptolemaic, more or less, 2,000, 2,300-year-old ruins all over the place. Then as you go back in time to, say, New Kingdom, there's still a lot, but not even close to as many as from Ptolemaic times. Then you go back to Old Kingdom, another 1,000 years, and there's even less that survives. There's still a lot, and I'll show it to you. But then as you go back, further and further into time, less and less has survived, if that makes sense. So that's one problem. The second is when you're not looking for something, you don't see it generally. So I remember very distinctly when I was in college and graduate school, we would talk about, or I was literally taught in some cases that, certain civilizations, they began at such and such a period. When you went back that far, archaeologically, you just stopped digging. You stopped looking because everyone knew there was nothing to find that was older, and so you were just wasting your time. And that attitude still prevails in many circles, that, you only go back so far, you only spend so much time looking for things if you're digging or exploring otherwise, and once you've hit a certain period, you don't bother looking further.
Right.
So the fact that people then don't look for it, plus anything that would survive is that much rarer, starts making it less and less probable that it's found. But now that we're looking for it, at least some of us, and are aware of it and thinking about it, and also realizing that many of these structures that go back to much earlier periods, they may, in some cases, and I'll show you places in Egypt where I think this is the case, and certain that this is the case, they may be, as the cliche goes, hiding in plain sight, because what happened, the later ancients, say the dynastic Egyptians, they would take and reuse much older structures. They would recarve them to a certain extent, just like they recarved the head of the Sphinx. They would chisel their names on things that were much older. And when you start thinking in those terms, you can see the evidence of how, in many cases, New Kingdom dynastic Egyptians, 3,500 years ago, were actually using much, much, much older materials and repurposing them, using them for their own, purposes and their own. So there's a lot of things going on there. But once we get out of the old paradigm, I think we're going to be finding, I know we're finding more evidence for these earlier civilizations, this earlier cycle of civilization.
Well, I'm of the nature of I'd love to believe, but I want to know these things, and we do
exactly. Well, this ties in with something that I always I've talked about for many years, and getting back to John Anthony West, something I give him a lot of credit for, because he was not coming as a scientist to it, but he was very scientific about things, and something that I've always advocated, he absolutely agreed with, is that you always have to have evidence, good, solid evidence, and you don't just go on flights of fancy of what you want to believe, but you go by the evidence, and wherever the evidence leads, that's what you go with. Absolutely.
Well, we got to get out of here. I really appreciate your time. This has been an amazing conversation, and everybody can find your work on the web at robertschoch.com, right? Where else can they find your work?
I think that's the best place to go, robertschoch.com, and again, it's robertschoch.com, and I know you have a link from your website. And from there, that's my website, and there are lots of links from there. So explore my website and follow links from there.
Well, thank you again so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure. Guys, that was Dr. Robert Schoch. We got to get out of here. We went right to the minute. Hang out for just a second, Dr. Schoch. But, don't forget, we'll be here next week, and I'll be hosting Saturday on Spaced Out Saturday. Good night, guys. What a great show.